ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामज्जताव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. Namo Ramana. We commence today's evening Atma Vichara by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesha. We have been reading from the book Bhagavan Answers, Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the Master's answers on the subject matter of Atma Vichara, self-enquiry, by our founder president, Sri A.R. Natarajan Ji. In a series of questions that we have been looking into, today we are looking at the question number 48. The devotee says, is it helpful in the enquiry to sit in a particular posture during meditation, or are they not quite necessary? Will they expedite the progress? I read the question again. Is it helpful in the enquiry to sit in a particular posture during meditation, or are they not quite necessary? Will they expedite the progress? Bhagavan says, the real asana is being established in the self-reality or the source. Sit in yourself. Where can the self go and sit? Everything sits in the self. Find out the source of I and sit there. Do not have the idea that the self cannot be realized without the help of asanas. They are not at all necessary. The chief thing is the inquiry and reach the source of the ego. These details, such as postures, may distract the mind towards them or to the body. I repeat Bhagavan's answer. The real asana is being established in the self-reality or the source. Sit in yourself. Where can the self go and sit? Everything sits in the self. Find out the source of I and sit there. Do not have the idea that the self cannot be realized without the help of asanas. They are not at all necessary. The chief thing is the inquire and reach the source of the ego. These details, such as postures, may distract the mind towards them or to the body. Seems to be a continued question of what Nandakumarji spoke about it yesterday, about the asana and how the self is the asana or the seat for everything. Now, the question here obviously is about the posture or the asana in which one should sit during meditation. Often we find that it is much easy to suggest an asana for the body. What asana would one suggest for the mind? Usually, the mind is not seen as something that has to be looked into at all. It is taken, we in the sadhana, we take the mind to be the instrument with which that we are going to realize. That means the mind, when I say the mind here, it's the intellect, the thoughts, everything collectively. We take it that that instrument is the instrument through which we will realize the self. And therefore, we continue to use it without paying much attention that why should I even have this thought? What asana should I sit? We don't even put a question to that very thought. Rather, we feel that thought is very, very important. And therefore, the body can be disciplined by some posture. And if it helps, let me do so. So often the mind, the ego, is not put into the radar of vichara. It is used or held on at all times. So Bhagavan is coming here to our rescue. He is saying the real asana, whether it is for the body or the mind or the ego or the intellect, anything is to make it remain in its source. That is the best asana. And that is the one to be done. What is the use of any other asana? It may help for one to get a better stability of the body, or maybe a better stability if the mind is put into some sort of an asana as a discipline, like it can be like ekachintana, we bring it back to something. But it is not the final goal. The final goal is to sit in the self itself. So Bhagavan is saying the real asana is being established in the self-reality or the source. Sit in yourself. So we have to get back to our own self. As we saw in the last week, there is actually initially the white paper, and moment a circle was drawn, and there is two spaces that was created, one within the circle, one outside of the circle. And if somebody were to ask where to write, please write something, naturally the question will come whether I should write within the circle or outside the circle. Likewise, all the thoughts are continuously dividing the clean space of the self. What is there is only self. But these thoughts are, which is what we call as a part of the Maya, which makes what is there to appear totally differently. And because of very strong reality attributed to the thought, so what it says, what it communicates alone becomes more real, though the fact may be something else. So Maya is that which makes what is there being veiled and what is not there to appear real. Even when these discussions are going on, the mind can be interpreting itself on the talks or the listening that is happening. So even at this point in time, it is veiling what is really happening, and it is giving an interpreted version which may be totally different from what is being said. So that is the thing with thoughts or the Maya. It is an instrument. I was listening to Vidushekhar Bharati ji is saying that there may be a good writer and he may be, if you say him to write without giving a pen, how would he do it? How would this thing? So God has used this Maya as an instrument to write. And the thing about this instrument is that it really hides what is there and reveals a totally different thing. And this is what we need to understand about our thought-driven life. Every time the thoughts are running, it is always giving a different reality to what is there. You know, what really is there is only the self, the being consciousness. But it goes on to give a different interpretation at all times. And this we need to be very, very watchful of. And that's why Bhagavan is saying, don't sit in any of these ideas. He says, do not have the idea of the self, cannot be realized without the help of asanas, or without the knowledge, or without the understanding. Don't worry about anything. The self is already there as the being consciousness. All we need to do is let go, let go, let go. And what remains is the seat of everything, the self alone. And that is the important thing that is to be understood. And to remain in that source, we have to constantly be in touch with this. And then the more and more the thoughts which were looking very, very real, start to become very, very very, very, what would you say, superficious. And we would start to realize that self alone is. And this is superficious thought that if we attend to, and if we attend to it even a little bit, it seems to veil the truth and seem to create a world by itself. We realize that by our own self, and that is the beauty of Atma Vichara. So Bhagavan has given this Atma Vichara to constantly bring that mind into the self, to make it dip in the self and give the real asana to it, the real asana to sit in the source of everything. How does he do? He says, no matter how many thoughts rises and what is the nature of the thought, whether they are good, bad, ugly, spiritual, non-spiritual, doesn't matter. For every rising thought, inquire to whom is this? And the answer would be that it is for me, not for somebody next to me. It's only for me. This thought is only for me. And thereupon, if we inquire, who am I then? What do I refer to as I? Or where from this I rises within me? When we take the mind, which was outward turned to a thought, inward turned to the source, and we take it to the real source, make it sit in the asana, and by every repeated sitting in the asana, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to hold on to the source itself and not get carried away by these thoughts which once appeared very, very real, and they start to lose their steam, and the self alone becomes more real. And therefore, we, as Bhagavan says, one gets established in the real self, the real source, the real asana. And that is the only thing that needs to be done. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, for the next 15 minutes, let us sit in the asana of the self. Ramana. Thank you. Over to Shardaka.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. Bhagavan is asking us to be stationed in that self, to be postured in the self, to take the asana in the self, to remain comfortably in the self, because asana is sthira and sukha. Sthira means that which does not change, which does not vary. Bhagavan is saying in the Ekashloki, Atma Nishtho Bhavatvam. The Ekashloki, which is recited at the beginning of every one of our sessions. Hridaya Kuhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram Hyahamaham Sakshat Atmarupena Bhati. So the self is shining as I, aham iti sakshat. Sakshat, very clearly, as the self it is shining, bhati, it is shining. So what are we to do, says Bhagavan? Hridivisha, enter the heart and remain. Manasa swam chinvata majjatava pavana chalana rodhat atmanishto bhavatvam. Manasa swam chinvata majjata va. This is one of the verses in chapter 2, or rather the only verse by Bhagavan as an answer in chapter 2 of Ramana Gita. It has been included by Ganapati Muni. And then he says that Bhagavan gives alternative paths. Majjata va. Va means or. You can do this or that, or pavana chalana rodhat, or you can control the breath. And what would be the result of it? Why would one do any of this? Atmanishto bhavatvam. To become an atmanishtha, to remain sthira, nishtha, to remain unmoving, to remain established. Remain established in the self. Bhagavan is telling all of us, O children, O my children, remain established in the self. Atmanishto bhava. So when this question comes, and in some of our seminars also the question has been taken up, is this a better way or is that a better way? Because Bhagavan has said you may meditate on it, Chinvata, you may enter into it, Majjata, you may dive into it, or you may even reach it by controlling the breath. So there is a lot of discussions about it which happened in some earlier years at Ramanacentre Center for Learning. And one of our senior members at that time has even written a small book called the Ekashloki about the various approaches to this Ekashloki, this shloka of Bhagavan. But what seems to me to be the most important part of that verse is Atmanishto bhava. Become established in the self. This is Bhagavan's repeated point. And he says, it's almost as if he is cajoling us. I don't mind what you do. You may do this or that or that. You may do anything. It's all right. But remember, you must become Atmanishtha. Whatever you do, otherwise, somehow or the other, get back to the self. And by emphasizing that, by telling us even in the answer given today, Do not relate the posture or any aspect to self-abidance. Do not imagine that self-abidance is dependent on anything, or the self is dependent on anything other than itself. And for us, the tendency to make the self dependent on something or the other is probably the root of all our problems. What is the self? The self is every goal that we are seeking. It is the only goal and it is every goal, because all that we ever seek is bliss. All that we ever seek is peace. And the only place where it is to be found is the self. However, due to some of our wrong, long habits, we are all the time moving towards some method, some process, something which we believe will result in happiness. If I do this, I will become happy. If I do that, I will become happy. The asana which is suggested is only one such thing. It's only one dependency of ours. Should I sit in a particular posture? Should I breathe in a particular way? Should I go to the right or should I go to the left? Bhagavan says, when you're already in Tiruvannamalai, where do you have to go? You don't have to go anywhere. So the whole process is given to us, or any process is given to us, not because the process in itself can actually establish us in the self, but because we are so oriented towards processes that we are given a process that will ultimately cut away our dependence on all other processes, all other activities, if we give all our time to meditation. Vishwanatha Swami told me, give all your spare time to meditation. Give all your spare time, whatever you may be doing. And if you start paying attention, if we start paying attention to our lives, we will find there is plenty of spare time that we can give, because very often there are so many thoughts that are not related to the job on hand. And even the thoughts related to the job on hand, apparently related to the job on hand, most of them may not be required for the job on hand. And when we are actually involved in a task, we find that we would be thinking very little. When we are fully involved in any task, there will be very little of thinking. There will just be a lot of focus, and that particular task will somehow just reveal itself to us step by step. And the more we are focused, the less we are thinking, the better the output in our tasks. But it is not the way we function. So how we function is with thoughts, with processes, with a need to think, and because we think that helps us to act, and because we think that action in turn will fetch us the self, which is happiness. We believe it of all objects in which we perceive happiness, onto which we project happiness, and we believe it of the self as well. We believe that we need to do something to get back to the self. Does it mean we don't need to do any sadhana? at all? If we say yes, it means we don't need to do any sadhana at all. That means there should be no movement of the mind towards anything. When we say that we need not do anything to attain the self, that means we need not do anything to attain anything, because self is all inclusive. Anything we attain is only self. Anything we move towards is only self. There is nothing apart from that. So if we say we do not need to do anything to attain anything, we literally must be able to get into that state of stillness in complete faith that we don't have to do anything. Everything is attained. And whether we look at it from the perspective of the fact that the self is ever attained, or we look at it from the perspective of the fact that everything in this world is preordained, and therefore Bhagavan is allowing everything to happen, and that there's nothing that we need to do at all. But if we believe that we need to do something, then Bhagavan says, all right, do something. And if you must do something, to get back to the self, inquire, turn towards the source through inquiry. Why inquiry? Because inquiry comes closest to non-doing. It comes closest to stillness. Because it literally forces us into points of stillness. When the question, who am I, is asked, it will literally force us into silence. At that moment, at least, until the next thought arises, at least it will turn us back into silence. And it reiterates the understanding that there is no meaning in any movement of the mind, because each and every movement of the mind, each and every goal, each and every seeking, each and every connection of happiness with an object is for me. It is only for me. It is I who seek. And if I do not know who this I is, who is seeking anything, of what significance is that seeking? So the question, who am I, reiterates to us the meaninglessness of every seeking, the meaninglessness of every movement of the mind, because it is only the movement of my mind. But I do not know who I am in the first place. So the question, who am I, is recommended by Bhagavan. The inquiry, who am I, is recommended by Bhagavan if we are unable to simply hold the self or simply remain as the self. If and only if we are unable to simply remain. Simply remaining as the self, Atmanishto Bhava. To remain seated in the self, says Bhagavan. And this Sadhu Om Swami says, Maname maname odiva mauna veliyil adava inimelalayade inbamudan idayasanathil alave. He calls that asana the throne. He says the throne of the heart. To rule, to be the ruler of the throne of the heart. You come running, oh my mind, come running and sit down on that throne of the heart. Become the emperor of the universe by sitting on the throne of the heart. Be seated on the throne of the heart. says Sadhu Om Swami. That is the space to which Bhagavan is inviting us, as it were. Come back and sit in the self, says Bhagavan. Sit in the self. In another place, Sadhu Om Swami says it is like sitting on the lap of Bhagavan. Tandai madimel ball say ni, he says. You are the child seated on the lap of the Father. Seated on the lap of the Father. So sit in the self, says Bhagavan. Be seated in the self. Turn back and get seated there. See, to be seated is also important. Why are we taught an external asana? Why are we taught to stay in a particular place at all as a first step? Because even to remain physically still is such a big challenge sometimes. To remain physically still is such a big challenge. So at least first learn to remain physically still. When you are physically still, then your attention is not on the body anymore because you're physically still. That is the idea. The idea is not to pay attention to the body and its stillness. The idea is to get into a state where one need not pay attention to the body. In our dance, in Bharatanatyam, we say that we must practice up till such a point that the attention does not go any more to the perfection in the dance. The practice is in order to perfect it so much that attention is no longer on the body. It may be, where we have to keep our hands. A lot of postural details are given to a dancer, and every one of them is to be forgotten. It is to reach a point where it is to be forgotten. So it is not the goal. It is not the goal. The goal is not perfection in movement. The goal is to reach such perfection in movement that the movement is forgotten. It is the same thing in everything. There is a senior person, as dancers, we attend workshops in makeup and various related areas. So a senior person, Vani Ganapati, conducted a workshop in makeup, and she said the best makeup and the best attire, the best way of getting dressed is you forget it once it is done. You forget what jewelry you're wearing. You forget the kind of makeup you have on your face. So you forget the dance, you forget the music, and you get back into the self. That is the purpose of all training. When we see some of these senior, even acrobats performing, so much perfection. But it happens, it looks as if with so much of ease. The trained acrobats, or even the ones who in India, there's a little girl who on the streets, they will suddenly set up they will, what's called domrata, I think, and then they'll set up 2 poles across like this and 1 pole across it. And a little girl will walk across it, carrying a pole with so much of ease. She will walk across. How? Because of the practice. So what is the purpose of that practice? In that case, it is to earn a livelihood, or it may be to please an audience. But ultimately, the purpose of practice in any area, including sitting, standing, walking, breathing, everything is not in order to focus on it, but in order to be able to forget it, in order to be able to let go, in order to not have any anxiety related to it. When there is a method, when there is a routine, when things are perfectly moving, one doesn't have to think about it. One is sitting in a vehicle which is moving perfectly, one doesn't have to think about it. That's the whole idea of getting into a good vehicle. So the whole idea of all these practices is to forget them. Therefore, Bhagavan says, you may start with forgetting them. If you like to, you may start with not worrying about anything other than the self. You may start off there itself. If you're unable to do that, then you can take any aid, and number of aids have been listed. Number of aids are supported by those who have practiced them and blessed them, great ones, including the yoga, the pranayama, the chitta shuddhi, then the arts, the practice of the fine arts, japa, everything. It depends on each one of us. And Bhagavan says in Ashtakam, he says, Irundane, Irundolir, Unai, Arivuruttidarkendre, Irundane, Madantorum, Vida, Vida, Uruvai. Oh, Arunachala, you remain in various religions in different forms. Why? Why are you so manifest in varied ways? Vida Vida Uruvai, why do you appear in so many forms, in so many paths, in so many means? Why? Irundolir Unai Arivuruttudarkendre, in order that people may understand, in order to reveal yourself. Who are you? Irundolir. You who ever are, you who are ever shining, to reveal this ever shining presence of yours, you are manifested manifold ways. So whichever way suits us, that becomes a prayer. Whatever we may do, if that action of ours turns attention back to the self, that action is a very good prayer. If what we are doing is turning the action, is turning our attention outward, if it weakens our love for the self, then it is of no use even if the action is exalted. If it heightens our surrender, if it heightens our dependence on the self, our understanding of the glory of the self, then it is prayer. And it is for each one of us to find what is best suited to ourselves. It is not necessarily the same for everyone. It cannot be. That's what Bhagavan indicates to us. And that is why he has accepted and said, yes, that's also fine. That's also fine, to so many questions put to him about people following various means. But since he has revealed to us the path of self-inquiry, it would be good if we can dedicate ourselves fully to it. If not, at least to dedicate some part of our time to it. That would be wonderful, because that's what is going to reveal the truth to us. Bhagavan has said, Tirumbi ahandanai dinamaha kankan teriyum yendranai. Teriyum yendranai. Oh Arunachala, you said, you told me that if you turn within continuously and try to see the self with the mind, if you try to seek the self, it will be revealed. You told me, O Arunachala, says Bhagavan. And later he says, Velivitteen unsayal. Now I have revealed your secret to the whole world. I have told everyone this secret which you revealed to me. I have revealed it to the whole world. So don't get angry with me that I have shared it with the whole world, but this is what I have done. I have shared it with the entire world. Velivitteen unsayal. So I have told everyone that it is your promise that if you turn back to the self, it will be revealed. Teriyum, teriyum. It's Arunachala's promise. It is Bhagavan's promise. So all we have to do is to turn back to the extent possible, to the extent that the grace allows us to do, but it is also waiting for us. So it will support whatever we want to do very eagerly. Our eagerness, our love, our passion is supported by the grace, by the self. In everything that we do, it is supported. And so, certainly, our effort to get back to the self is also supported. What appears to be a defeat at times, what appears to be a success at times, is all only within the mental realm anyway. So, all we have to do is to use the very tool of inquiry to not allow ourselves to get caught in thoughts of moving, of reaching, because that means we would not be seated. It means we are already on the run. We're already gotten up. We're moving somewhere. We want to move somewhere. We have gotten up. If we are seated, there is no question of getting anywhere. There's no question of loss or gain. There is only the fullness of the self. There is only the grace of the self. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Dilip?
Yes, Akka. Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyormimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ravanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihinam Hridhi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hridhi Chintayami. Namo Ramana.